Okay. I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole meeting of October the 25th to order. And this meeting is held in the council chambers. The public may attend in person to view live or online at Village of Cumberland YouTube channel. And if you do wish to attend, you must have a mask on. But you don't have to have vaccine cards, are not required. So approval of the agenda?
Move approval.
Second.
And all in favor? Carried. Delegations that the committee receive the delegation of Lindsay McGinn, Facilitator, Comox Valley Community Health Network, and Evan Joliker, Project Consultant from the Community Substance Use Strategy Committee, and Sharon Karsten from the Walk With Me Project, and their 2 reports.
Move receipt. Second.
All in favor? Carried. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Is my sound okay there in council chambers? Great. Thank you for having us here today. Before we begin our presentation, I would just like to ask Barb White to start us off with a welcome and a blessing.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. And thank you for inviting us here tonight. My name is Barbara White. I was born Barbara Billy. I'm a descendant of the Pentlatch people on my father's side and descendant of the Comox people on my mother's side. On behalf of the members of the Comox First Nations, I'd like to welcome you to the unceded territory of the Comox people on my relations. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barb. So we're here today. There's a couple extra folks here with us. Oh, sorry. And I'll just do a quick round of intros before we get started. So I'm here today. My name is Lindsay McGinn. I'm the facilitator of the Comox Valley Community Health Network, but I'm here today on behalf of the Community Substance Use Strategy Committee. And with me presenting today is Evan Jolicoeur, who was our consultant for the project and continues to volunteer with our committee. And one of our peer supports, Ali Reeder, is also here on behalf of the committee. And we've also brought with us our partners from Walk With Me. So Sharon Karsten, Darcy Honey, and Barb White are all our partners at Walk With Me. So before we get started today, we are here to present to you both our reports, as well as let you know what we have planned for phase 2. And we'd like to extend an invitation to the village to continue to work with us. And just before I begin, I really want to thank the village for their participation so far in this work. Both Councillors Brown and Kettler have been members of our committee over the last year and a half. Councillor Brown especially has been instrumental in the development of this report as part of our working group. And then I also just wanted to thank Mayor Baird and CAO Clayton Posting for their help in submitting our Plan H grant. So I'm going to pass it over now to Evan just to talk briefly about the phase 1 report.
Thanks, Lindsay. And good evening, Mayor Baird and councillors. So you've all received our phase 1 report. Hopefully you've had an opportunity to take a read through it. I'll just really quickly review the highlights of the report. We wanted to focus on the amazing work that's been done up until this point. And so the beginning of the report really speaks to that and speaks to the leadership that we have here in our regional area in the Comox Valley, including in the village of Cumberland. We address the specific frameworks that are used across North America to address substance use. We talk about the need and the why around substance use strategy here in Comox Valley. We get into a little bit of the data, which I think for folks who like to see the numbers and to hear the stories, we address that in our data section. We do a little bit of a scan around the existing supports and services, including gaps in our community. We talk a little bit around how we engage, and I know that many of you were involved in our community engagement sessions, including the work that we did with peers, people with lived and living experience in our community, and people that have been touched by substance use. We then get into the exciting part, which is the ideas and the suggestions around how to move forward. We review in that the assets, gaps, and barriers that we have here in the Comox Valley. And then we lay out a few steps for a path forward around the next step. So really, this is a phase one report. It is not a strategy yet. It is the phase one leading to the development of a strategy. So it does have its limitations. We didn't have enough resources to be able to gather all the commitments and secure accountability and an agreed upon framework from all stakeholders, all institutions in our region. So that's to come. We'll get to that next, but I wanted to just highlight the phase one report, and I'll pass it on to Sharon to speak to the Walk With Me report.
Thanks, Evan. The Walk With Me project is a community action project and a research project, community engaged research designed to uncover the human dimensions of the toxic drug poisoning crisis. This is a project that comes from unconventional roots through the Comox Valley Art Gallery and through researchers associated with the gallery, but just really recognizing the enormous impact that this crisis has had. Many will know that toxic drug poisoning deaths have amounted to over 7,000 since this was labeled a provincial health emergency in 2016, and that these numbers are only rising in the era of COVID. We have lost many of our friends and colleagues to this crisis, and have recently unveiled a report that we've been working on where we show the powerful insights that have come forward from the lived experience community, from frontline workers and from family members who have been at the heart of this crisis this whole time. And so I welcome you to read the report. It's also located at walkwithme.ca. There's a lot in the report that I welcome you to sit with. I just want to pass it to Barb and to Darcy to say a few additional words about the project. Barb?
Oh, you're muted, Barb.
Sorry. It's been an honor for me to be a part of this project and to uncover the stories that we've gotten from the homeless. These stories are treasures to us, and it gives us our messages that we're passing on to you. This is how we came up with our solutions. It was from the stories that we heard is where we got our solutions from. So thank you for listening to us, and have a good evening.
Thank you, Barb. And Darcy?
Hi, yes. Just want to introduce myself. There's probably a few of you that don't know who I am. My name's Darcy Honey. I'm a First Nations Aboriginal from Beaver House, Ontario. I just would like to express what I bring to with the Walk With Me is being someone that's had the lived experience on the streets. Also with the toxic drug poisoning crisis, that's something I've dealt with a long time. So I just like to say also on that note, when I got introduced to the Walk With Me was about 6 months ago. And just with the community stories that the community that we've been reaching out to has been super impactful on myself as to themselves. So I just wanted to share my gratitude with the team of Walk With Me. It's been a pleasure to be with the program and hoping to do great things with it. So thank you.
Thank you. Just to conclude by saying that there are a series of recommendations in our report that range from recommendations around decriminalization, safe supply, to including people with lived experience in leadership roles in municipal government. And so I welcome any thoughts that you have around these recommendations, and we're always open to finding ways to work together to make them happen. So thank you for having us today, and I'll pass it back to you, Lindsay.
Thanks, Sharon. And I'm going to go to Evan for this phase 2.
Yeah, really exciting. So we've done the phase 1, and a big part of that was partnering with Walk With Me to use and understand the good work that they've done around the process of engagement that centers peers' voices, and also the importance of supporting and including cultural leaders in our community. So we're really wanting just to center that in the work that we've done so far, and needing to bring that into the work that we need to do in the near future. And so although the Walk With Me really focused on the importance of the toxic drug poisoning crisis, the Substance Use Strategy Committee and our work around phase 2 will include all substances, and you'll see that in some of the data in the report. And so the first thing that we need to do towards phase 2 is really to get buy-in from the systems, right? The systems that have the majority of the resources, the staffing, the programs, and the services in our communities. And so to do that, we understand that we need to transition to a collaborative where all stakeholders and institutions and system players are at the table. They see themselves as a unique participant in both addressing the issues and the challenges and the harms, and towards moving towards solutions and action. The second piece is mapping the substance use response and the system in the Valley, connecting between each one of them. And this is something that we heard really clearly in our phase 1 report, which there was, and you'll see that on page, I believe on page 23. We'll have a little green box, page 25 of the report, which was a unique finding of our report, which is that there was some discrepancies between what we heard on the ground from folks in our community who access services or attempt to access services, and what we heard from the service providers themselves. So really taking a holistic approach to mapping and understanding the entirety of the system in Comox Valley, including those services and service providers offering supports in Cumberland, will help us understand any redundancies, where there are gaps, how services relate to other services, how specific community organizations work with other organizations, really so that we can understand what's being done, what's missing, and how we can do things better, and how we can be more efficient and serve the population and our community members in a good way. Thirdly, we want to convene further dialogue. We initiated a lot of that in our phase 1 report. The Walk With Me project, that was the entirety of their project, was, as you heard from Sharon and Barb, and the rest of the Walk With Me team, was that this was a big part of their work, was having conversations and sharing stories. And so we want to continue to have those dialogues. And we want to have those dialogues with system agents, with those stakeholders, the RCMP, the school district, municipalities, bylaw officers, small business owners, community members, and service delivery organizations. So we want to continue those dialogues. Fourthly, and this is really important, is securing commitment and shared accountability. And this, of course, as you know, municipal leaders and elected officials, you understand the importance of sharing accountability towards the things that we say that we want to do in our communities to make our communities healthier and stronger and more resilient in the face of ongoing challenges in our society. And of course, establishing a phase 2 report and funding. We need to develop more funding models, and Cumberland has really spearheaded and initiated that conversation around how we can secure further funding for phase 2. And this will both include the development of the phase 2, but also the implementation of a comprehensive Comox Valley substance use strategy. Phase 3, probably the phase that we're all really trying to get to as soon as possible, as a result of the continual harm and really challenges that were being faced by our community members and our families and our communities more broadly, is collective action, moving towards collective action. So really, this is an extension and a deep collaboration and commitment amongst all community institutions, including local government, First Nations, the RCMP, the school district, Island Health, First Nations Health Authority, and the diverse community-based organizations and service providers that we have here in Comox Valley. So this is really it. To get to phase 3, this is it. This is what we've all been dreaming of. This is all what we've been hearing that we need. We need to move forward to create the healthy, connected community in our region that we all so desperately want. And so Phase 3 is really creating and implementing the model based on Phase 2 and moving towards collective action by having all the stakeholders around the table.
Thanks, Evan. So finally, that brings us to our request for support today to Mayor and Council. So we are inviting you to participate as a group on one of the walks with the Walk With Me team. We would ask that you continue with the staff support of the project, both as a liaison to the working group, but additionally in the same way that we came to you to apply on our behalf for the Plan H grant. We would hope that if those opportunities are presented in the future, that you would support us in that way. We are going to all local governments looking for financial support for Phase 2. The City of Courtenay has been generous and made their commitment last week. We have presentations lined up with Comox and the Regional District coming up. But we do realize that we will need to also apply for additional funding outside of local governments. We ask for the continued leadership that you have shown and the advocacy that you have shown to advocate for the changes we're asking for at the local, provincial, and national level. And then finally, we would just ask that once we do have our collaborative up and running, that you would delegate an elected official to participate in that collaborative with us. So that's our presentation here today. Thank you so much for your time and attention to this. Thank you for taking the time to review the reports, either now or when you, after this presentation, and we're here to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. We'll go around the table, and so we'll start with Councillor Sproul.
All I can say is this is a very good initiative that is made of a multitude set of skills, and it makes me feel very, what's the word, emotional that all this is coming out of what has happened before. I think that this group has worked hard, and we won't be discussing this, I don't think, today, but we shall definitely take it to heart. Thank you.
Councillor Sullivan.
Yeah, thank you all for your presentation. In our community, we've definitely noticed the gaps that you guys talk about, and getting people from the street to treatment and all the in-betweens is something that the Valley is not really totally ready for or not capable of. And so I'm just appreciative of the work you guys are doing and look forward to working together some more for the Phase 2. Thank you very much, guys.
Councillor Kettler.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to all of you. I know that it's a very difficult thing to be working on this on a daily basis and having to face this crisis, which oftentimes you probably feel quite alone in that. And I hope that the path that we're on will change that. I agree that it probably looks very different from, the Island Health perspective or other larger groups, elected officials, than it does on the ground. And so I'm very happy to have the people with lived and living experience contribute to this and talk about those discrepancies. And so we actually are on the same page, and we have that basis for moving forward. I think that's really important. So thank you so much for that. I know we're only in Phase 1 with this, but there's really good suggestions in here about how to reduce harm, and also really good direction for us as elected officials of where we need to go. So thanks again.
Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Maren. I just reiterating the same. I very much appreciate the leadership you guys both groups have shown in the way you've done the work on the ground, in coming up with how the committee works together and has brought peer experience into the conversation. I think that's vital. and bringing the cultural diversity of potential ways of working with these problems into the conversation. I think that's also a key piece, and I'm very much looking forward to the collaborative. I think it's a very important piece of the next step, is bringing all those people together to bridge those gaps. Like Evan spoke of, the data and the data being a key piece to have access to that information so that we can really see where those gaps are and what's needed, and then also seeing the difference between what is being offered and the way people are finding access or lack thereof. And just reiterating that the substance use strategy is about all substances. So whether we are seeing, in particular in Cumberland, whichever substance we're thinking about, much of what happens in Cumberland is hidden, and this work is very important for those people as well. So thank you again for your leadership and for bringing this forward.
Thank you. I do have a question, and it's on page 88 of the report, or page 13 of the council, and it's highlighted there is this recommendation involves asking the federal government for an exemption from the Controlled Substance Act to allow the possession of small amounts of illegal substances within the municipal boundaries. Can someone explain to me why you chose the municipal boundaries?
I can. This is in the Walk With Me report. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. So there's two different understandings of decriminalization. One relates to the federal government's responsibility to decriminalize simple possession of drugs, and the idea being that this is reducing stigma and really reframing the issue as a public health issue rather than a criminal justice issue. And so that's one approach. And another approach, which is very new and has just been taken on by the city of Vancouver, involves also advocating for Section 53 to be revoked, such that decriminalization is made possible within local boundaries. So it's similar to the initiative that happened for Insight as well. And I'm sorry, my kids are yakking in the background, but yeah, it's just recognizing that there are two ways of approaching decriminalization, and many governments have pursued the first, which is lobbying the federal government, but there is an additional step that can be taken to request the power to decriminalize within municipal boundaries.
Okay, thank you very much. I just would like to commend you on the amount of work that you did. This report is amazing. It covers all the bases, the data that you collected. I know in the past it was always very difficult to collect data and get the numbers from the different municipalities, and it has been a challenge for many other groups, so I can see why. But I would like to thank you very much for including all the organizations and groups that you've included, because this is not a project that you can do on your own. You need all those people involved in all those different organizations. The one thing that I would like to know is Island Health. Do they not fund any of this at all? Of what you're planning to do?
Well, the Island Health does fund the community health network. All the funding for the health network comes from Island Health and is housed within the regional district. So certainly they are supporting my role in convening this work and the work of the Substance Use Strategy Committee. But to date, I'll just speak on behalf of the substance use strategy here in terms of our report. But what we really tried to do was to get the voice of the community and the voice of peers really grounded in what we do. Island Health is a partner in this work, but they're also a large system. So we're really looking at engagement with Island Health in the next phase of our work.
Okay, thank you. This report that you have done, are there other municipalities that have done similar reports?
Evan, do you want to speak to
Yeah.
that one? Yeah.
Sure. So as I said, this report is the kind of lead up to the development of a strategy. And so the majority of larger municipalities across Canada actually have a substance use strategy. Our peers on Vancouver Island, there are a few on the mainland in British Columbia as well. And so this sort of report, which kind of sets the framework, sets the table for how to move forward on solutions, is kind of a preemptive kind of analysis of where we are and where we need to go. And so many of the strategies, to Lindsay's point around funding, many of the strategies in municipalities across this country actually have dedicated staff specifically working full-time on both the development, the data analysis, the community conversations, the convening of the leaderships in the communities, and ensuring that the implementation of the strategy and the accountability mechanisms are in place. And so the short answer is yes, many municipalities in British Columbia have them, and even more across the country. And I would argue that also we are one of the few with a regional district the size of population as Comox Valley that does not have any kind of concrete plan to address strategically the issue of substance use in our communities.
Thank you. Just one more question.
I think Sharon made that. It's a big error.
Would it be possible to just address the question around island health? Can I jump in?
Yes.
Sorry. I just wanted to acknowledge that the Walk With Me team has been invited by Island Health to walk with frontline staff in hospitals throughout Island Health, and that we have been funded to do that work, and we have been doing that work for about 6 months. And so that does show investment and real interest, and we've had really powerful dialogues happen through those conversations. So I just want to acknowledge that in response to your question around Island Health support.
Thank you. One more question, and that concerning funding. Are you looking at a one-time funding request, or do you see this as happening over the years, a commitment from council for a number of years?
We would be looking for ongoing funding to support the work. I wish we could say this would all be done in a year, but I think all of us here know that that's unlikely.
It's like a lot of organizations that they spend so much time looking for funding that it causes problems. Yes, I understand that. So thank you very much for presenting to council tonight.
Thank you, everyone.
Next, we have reports. Yes, the committee received the Village of Cumberland Communications Snapshot Report.
Move receipt.
Second.
All in favor? Carried.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. It's good to be in front of you again. Just as a follow-up to my last update on this in September, what you have in front of you is our new communication snapshot report. Again, this is an opportunity that we are able to take thanks to restart funding. And as well, you've been part of some of the conversations around it, but we've hired Zinc Strategies. They've come in and done some engagement both with staff, with council, with the public and some of our community partners, amongst some other things. All this data has kind of been pulled into one report where they've also provided some short and long-term recommendations on how we can best manage our communications as an organization. So I'd like to invite Colleen Dane and her colleague Emily Kendi here to present the findings and the recommendations put forward. As you can see from my report, I have one recommendation for you to revisit at the end, simply to direct staff to come back with an implementation plan and strategy about how we can start to check some of these things off the list and prioritizing some of these things, taking the low-hanging fruit and putting some ideas in front of you versus the bigger picture items. So I'll hand it over to Colleen, if that's okay.
Your Worship and Council, thank you very much for giving us a little bit of time this evening. So as Kaylin mentioned, my name is Colleen Dane, and I work with Sync Strategies, and me and Emily Kendi, my colleague, work together on this review of Cumberland's communications activities. We were asked to do a review about what is going on now and take a look at some of the suggestions and ideas that staff and the community have about ways to be able to move forward and make some improvements about how everybody is kept in the loop about activities that the village is undertaking. You have the fuller report in your agenda, and I'm just gonna highlight a couple of the slides as some kind of key points and then leave it open to questions to you afterwards. So this first one just highlights some of the response that we got through our engagement process. So in August and September, we did kind of a two-pronged approach. One of them was working with staff to collect feedback through a staff survey, a few staff brainstorming sessions, which had about 20 staff members attend and share their thoughts, and then a series of interviews with managers and some of you here at the table too. And then on the other side, we did a series of surveys out to the community. So one in particular for kind of general residents and another one for community partners to collect their feedback on communications today and some ideas and thoughts they had for the future. So we looked at both internal communications and external communications, focusing on internal communications, obviously with the staff side of it. So I'm sharing just a few of the results that we saw that just kind of stood out to us as we were looking through the reports. There is a more fulsome data set that staff has, and so you're welcome to contact them about getting it if you'd like to kind of dive in deeper to the questions and the specifics moving forward. But one of them that stood out for us when we spoke to staff was that the most of the people who responded to the first question about how informed they felt about activities outside of their own area within the village didn't feel they were very informed at all, either with a limited amount of information or just not much really at all. Which offers definitely opportunity to be able to expand understanding beyond kind of their own responsibilities. And then another one that stood out beside that was some of the main tools that people use to share information with others within their own departments. And so emails and meetings and phone obviously stand out for us. Docs make sense. The informal conversations here was just an interesting one of note because while it's useful and it can mean a lot of really good things, it also can make it harder to understand kind of when people learn things and know things and whether or not everybody has been given the same information overall. So out of this and all the other pieces of feedback, if there's written and verbal feedback, we do kind of a categorizing exercise basically to collect themes of comments. We had 3 really clear ones, kind of float to the top, I guess you'd say, on internal communications. And one of them was around improvements to meetings and meeting efficiencies that could help keep the team all in the loop, some clarification about roles and approaches for communications within the team, and then some website improvements. Although we often think about websites as external communications tools, we definitely heard clearly that it's also an important internal communications tool in the village. So the short-term recommendations, again, you have these all in front of you, so I'm just going to kind of highlight a couple, but they kind of range from hosting regular staff update meetings all the way up to building more structure around the email newsletter as a tool in the short term to be able to keep the staff looped in about activities outside of their direct area of focus. And then, also adding some clarity about who is responsible for communications on given topics and activities, services, and programs, so that if questions arise, it can be more clear to everybody about how they can get the information that they need. And then long-term recommendations on the internal side kind of take all those pieces a bit further. They look at kind of more formalization around calendars that would kind of tie closely on the website side to the introduction of an internal portal or an intranet that could help be a tool for staff moving forward. But it also looks at building a formal communication strategy and eventually creating a dedicated communications role on the staff team. So with those highlights on the internal communications, I'll flip over to some of the external communications results that we had. And so again, I've pulled out a few of the results that stood out to us as we looked through all the survey feedback that we collected. And one of them was, on a scale of 1 to 10, how informed people felt about village activities. And you can see that there's a really strong spike right in the middle ground. So that 5, 6 definitely stood out, but even kind of the outsides of that middle. And that's good. That's a good foundation of people who are still learning from the village, which is great, and getting what they need. The other one that stood out to us was the primary sources of information that people reported, how they're learning about the village's operations. And we're familiar, of course, with all these tools, social media, news media, word of mouth, the email newsletter. What stood out to us was the degree of those sources that are not in kind of direct control by the village. So for social media, for the news media, and for word of mouth, we're kind of relying on other people to relay the village's information or other tools to relay the information. Not that there's, not that you're completely separate from those things. Of course, there's influence there, but it can potentially pose a risk when you don't have kind of a really clear direct contact to the community. A couple other ones on this topic. So the good news was 3/4 about of the people who had sought information from the village in the last year did feel satisfied with what they got back. So when they did reach out, they did get what they need, which means that it is out there and available, and there are people working to respond. And then the bottom top areas of interest is what we heard from the community as the kinds of issues and topics they would really like to hear more about from the village. So based on this and then some of the other results, obviously, that we received, we put together, we came up with 3 themes of recommendations on external communications. One of them being around social media and presence there. Some continued website improvements, so kind of a extension to the recommendations on the internal communication side. And then some focus on that email and newsletter and growth and optimization around that. It definitely surfaced as a popular tool and one that is growing and building, and we see some opportunity to be able to continue that growth on it. So the short-term recommendations include developing a village office, that's not the formal name, but a village office Facebook page that is fairly scheduled and structured, with some clear guidelines about how it can be managed in the meantime by the team that's on hand now. And then some improvements to the website that make it easier for the community to find the information that they're most commonly going to the website to find, rather than relying on the search function that is kind of the key way of navigating it now. And then some suggestions around the email newsletter as well about further promoting it and making sure that it's working well and really readable. And then long-term recommendations along those 3 themes again include kind of taking the social media to more of a real-time posting. So rather than just using it on a really scheduled, structured piece, being able to use it to adapt to things kind of as they're coming. Some further improvements to the website that would continue to make the most important information easier for the community to find. And then additional optimization as well of that email newsletter that I think is going to be an important tool moving forward for you all. And
And then just one other note about this. This, of course, kind of overlaps with the long-term recommendations on the internal communication side. So that's where you see the communication strategy and the additional communication staff resources that would make some of these steps, more feasible. And so, we definitely had some additional observations that kind of, revealed themselves as we were going through all this information and having conversations with so many people. And they're not data driven, but we wanted to share them because we thought they were good insights overall of the process. So the first was it stood out to us how consistent the feedback was regardless of the audience that we were speaking to. So whether it was a community group that is often kind of working closely with the village to promote things, to a general member of the public, to a staff person, we heard terms like website and social media and newsletter, email newsletter regularly and consistently across all of them. The second one was how realistic really people's goals were, like what their recommendations were for steps forward. So I know whenever we start talking about communications, there can be a concern about it just being too big and too all-encompassing, too many resources being required. And we talked about that in advance, that we didn't want to, in this survey process, mislead the community into the idea that we might kind of leap to this whole huge new stratosphere. And what we found was that actually the suggestions that came back were really quite reasonable, and I think reflected an understanding about kind of where the village is at and what is, a reasonable expectation moving forward. And then finally, we wanted to just definitely highlight that the response from staff was really impressive and positive. There was just a general tone of commitment to seeing this improve and a willingness to see change, to be able to see that improvement happen. Excuse me. And so we appreciate very much their candor and their engagement. And I think that their approach and consideration of it, bodes well to next steps for you all. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, and Emily, who's also very familiar with the data, can also add any more if there are other comments.
Councillor Sullivan.
Yeah, thanks, Colleen and Emily. Thank you. I feel like, we've been talking about Facebook presence here for several years, which has mostly just been cost prohibitive. But since the last time we really wholesomely talked about that, we've hired a couple more people. So maybe that's something we can look into on the administrative side for sure. It's kind of sad. I do agree with our website leaves some stuff to be desired, even for me. But it's sad that Facebook is 1,000 times faster than anyone looking at our website. So it might be just kind of the real time to have both improve the website, but also have a real live, like you say, real time Facebook, because that's just as fast, that's faster than anything we got. So those are some great suggestions, and I think we can kind of figure that out. But thanks.
No problem. Councillor Kettler.
Yeah, thank you. I think when it comes to communications, there's always room for improvement. When it comes to the internal communications, I really got the sense that we could do better with our interdepartmental overlap, and that if there was more communication between departments, we could probably catch more things and have more synergy as a corporation, and really make sure that we're using the time wisely, using the dollars to the best that we can, so we know the timing of different departmental projects, and just a better understanding of the general goals of the organization. The external communications, I think definitely there has been a huge deficit in the social media realm, and that's noticed by everyone. And when there is such a deficit, I think it often falls upon members of council to try and fill that deficit, which can be problematic because it's not always a unified message that comes out. So I think that it's great if we could have staff putting out real-time information for people, and I think that would help the community feel more connected to the village and to council. So that's great. Thanks so much.
Councillor Brown?
Yeah, thanks to both of you for this. It's a great start on looking at some basic improvements. I agree. The website, I think, is getting a little better in the searchability bit, but it's still not the easiest thing to navigate, especially I think for residents who are looking for something, they're not quite sure what they're looking for, and so it's hard. The search function just is not doesn't work if you don't have the right words, right? So yeah, definitely some website improvements. But the thing that kept coming up for me when we were talking about especially the internal, but even some of the external communications is our development services grant, and potentially using some of that to revise how that information comes onto the website or the application process and that sort of thing. So hopefully we can work some of this work into that grants work. Yeah, and I agree with the rest of council that social media is a thing. It's not going anywhere, and you know, I've generally post the meetings on the bulletin board, and people are really enthusiastic, and mostly I don't get too many challenging questions, but when I do, it's challenging. So be great if it wasn't me doing that. But yeah, thanks. This is a great start.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your report. It was, it's always great to have someone else come in and go over what we're doing and make recommendations, because we can't always see what the issue is. Although it doesn't take rocket science from us to realize that there is issues. And my only concern is I agree with Facebook, I agree with the website, but we also have to remember that there's people that are not on those, do not participate in that. And we need to keep that door open also. So it can be challenging when you've got so many other outlets to use. So thank you very much. And I'm really glad that staff was very open, and you got the information that you required from them to move this forward. So I look forward to what our next step is going to be, and it can be very exciting. Yes. Oh, yes.
I was just going to say, when you touched upon the other methods, the many ways of communicating, it looks to me that paper newsletters have not really been a lot of use to we haven't put any out for a while, but I'd see the waste paper basket at the post office be full of that stuff. People just go, oh, junk mail from the village. They don't necessarily, and some of them are really important about, well, everything's important, but public hearings and stuff, it is all there. So we do try and cover all the media, but I think, what do you say, the Cumberland Bulletin Board, and I think they're more, because they're so much quicker to look at, and you're already seated. Anyway,
So there are people that subscribe to our website and get updates all the time. Is there any way of doing that in a mail out to residents? Or is that cost prohibitive? Yes.
Yeah, no, that, thank you, Your Worship. I was just going to mention that was one of the things that, you know, when we went down this road with this project, you always know that, you know, communication is a really interesting process. I mean, certainly that's why I brought the experts in. And it's something that, you know, I mean, just in general, the feedback from the whole community, staff and all that, there was, you know, things that really jumped out. One was definitely the well, we call it, or it's called the e-newsletter, but it is really that notice that comes from the website, and it was very highly subscribed. I didn't realize how many people were utilizing that, and so we talked about this when the report was presented. Staff were talking about this already last week, how we can actually take that because you're right, not everybody's on social media. Not everyone gets a newspaper. There's lots of other things, but that seemed to be one that was certainly well used, and it was the feedback from the community was definitely strong on that one. So there is some things that we can explore on that that would be fairly straightforward, that would allow us to get that information out, and even in almost a more expanded version of that. So that's one of the things that we're going to explore. The only other thing I just wanted to mention was I think back to the website. I think, and this is a little bit my own interpretation of it, so take this for what it is. But I think in some cases, and probably in our website case, we were looking a little bit ahead, down the road of something that was, it's basically a search, engine type of website, and everyone uses Google, or most people use Google or something, and that was the way. I think, and we talked about this again as staff, is I think in a lot of ways we, as municipal governments and local governments, should really keep it really simple. And if you go to most local government or municipal governments, it's basically there's a standard format. So we don't need to be creative, is what I'm saying. Is it can be very simple, toggle down and not go down. And so that's one of the things that I think the feedback that we heard a little bit, that we want to investigate that and take it to what would you go to most local governments. It's not flashy. There's a couple of nice pictures, but it's just like Councilor Brown was saying, like, where is that information? There's some things I don't know the actual the search criteria for that. So these are some of the things that we'll investigate and bring back to council. But it was really helpful. The report from staff's perspective is a lot of things that are fairly straightforward for us to start working on, and we'll bring back that report if council wishes.
Thank you very much. Excellent discussion. Okay, there is a motion there.
That the Committee of the Whole recommend that Council direct staff to report to Council with an implementation plan as it relates to the communication snapshot report.
Second?
Seconded.
All in favor? Did you have a question?
No.
No? Okay. Carried. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
That the committee receive the council procedure amendment bylaw report.
Move receipt.
Second.
All in favor? Carried.
Thank you, Council. So back in last month, you received a report on changes to the procedure bylaw, and primarily that was for the province's new authority to allow electronic council meetings in the whole, like we've been doing since, had been doing in 2020 with the COVID pandemic. So we've brought a draft bylaw for you, and we brought it back to Committee of the Whole just for a once over for you, and give you an opportunity to take a look at what staff is proposing. And on page 46 of your agenda, there's a table there with the proposed amendments to the procedure bylaw, and we can go through that on each subject of amendments. And before we do, I just wanted to note to you that when you're thinking about these amendments, they'll apply to this council, but they'll also be applying to future councils as well. So that's just something to keep in mind. As dynamics change on a council, it's got to work for others as well. So it's a good thing to keep in mind. So I'll just go through the table, and I guess if that's okay, Mayor Baird, we can take them one at a time. So
yes.
The first amendment is to allow electronic meetings as a whole. So all members would participate electronically as it was done during the pandemic. And basically there's two circumstances where that could happen. In the bylaw, it's proposed that the corporate officer could make that call if there was an emergency or some special circumstance or a public health event. And we discussed that a bit at the last Committee of the Whole under the state of emergency. I've sort of softened that a little bit to give a little more discretion there, if you're comfortable with that, sitting with the corporate officer. And the other circumstance, and it should be an or rather than an there by resolution of council. That means it would have to be planned and scheduled ahead of time. And one consideration there that I wanted to bring up is that the bylaw proposes that it would be notified to council and the public in your agenda for the meeting, which is set the Thursday before the meeting. So it's not a great, it's not really responsive to change that proposal. So I guess it's that comfort level of council where maybe in that emergency response we might need a little more to be a little more responsive. So if council's comfortable with that, we might look at revising that. Not that it's in the agenda, but it's maybe that day if a circumstance arose that we'd have to call that. And if you're comfortable leaving that with staff.
Yes.
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
You're comfortable with that?
Yes.
Great.
Nobody spoke
Agreed.
up, so we assume.
I think I worry too
All in
much
favor?
about those things. The next subject is individual members attending electronically at an in-person meeting. And the bylaw's been drafted so that limits as is with one member attending electronically, no change proposed. And we heard when we brought this forward earlier that the suggestion of potentially more committee members attending at a meeting. And we've put that in the bylaw, looking for some feedback from council. There is an option that you could allow 2 members to attend electronically to an in-person meeting, and that would be for any reason. We haven't included any restrictions. The disadvantages to that, it may be more challenging for the chair to have a discussion at the council table with having members on the screen, and maybe being more challenging for them to be recognized to speak and be part of that conversation. So it would be great to have some feedback on how many members of council you'd like to have participating electronically, and if there's any limitations, if it should be for health reasons or if they're not in the area, in the region.
I know in the past we did 1, but I'm not against having 2 because of the fact that if a member of council is not feeling well and doesn't want to pass it on to the rest of us, I'd really appreciate it if they were on electronically. And so I have no problem with that for that reason. Councillor Sullivan?
I thought we were limited with our capabilities.
We were previously, because we just had a speakerphone. So now we have a great system to bring you in electronically. So it's kind of opened up a little bit.
Okay, Councillor Brown?
Yeah, I agree with Mayor Baird that we could have up to 2. I don't think we want to get into a situation where people are going on vacation and logging in from vacation, but if somebody's sick or their child is sick or and we just don't want to put each other at risk, or we have to be somewhere else for another meeting, I can see that both Councillor Kettler and Mayor Baird may be away for something at the same time, and then so I think 2,
Okay.
whether we put stipulations on how and why, that's up to you.
No restrictions.
I also think that, yes, and sometimes what happens is the agenda comes out and somebody is on holidays. And this topic might be very important to this member of council. Now, we could either take it off the agenda, but sometimes that's not appropriate for the person that's doing the letter or the correspondence or whatever, that it might be the council member can attend when they're on holidays. Just leave it open. It's be totally discretion. Yes?
I feel like there probably should be some stipulation. We should probably say it's for illness or temporary travel. I'm just thinking if future councils, there's a possibility that somebody would always be calling in, not even in Cumberland, but from a different
It could
community.
be abused. It could be
right,
abused,
that,
yeah.
that,
Yes.
we would probably want some limitation on that.
Mm-hmm.
but so not for convenience.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. We can try and capture
Yes.
that.
Yeah, so certainly, we could look at some language there that would cover that off. I do know that, there are other circumstances that may come up, so we'll have some language that be flexible enough, but also not have it that, if somebody was away for vacation, they're just, I can just log in. So we could look at some language there. There's some good examples out there for that, so.
Good. Thank you.
And I know just from another perspective, and I've heard it here, is that we are seeing a lot of meetings where people do have, like, say, a child sick or something where they're not able to leave home. So that flexibility, at least 2 is probably beneficial for, for council. So.
And the thought too is if for some reason they're interrupted, we still have a quorum here.
Yeah.
So continue the meeting.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. The third subject is notice and agendas, and this is a bit of a housekeeping update. Currently, the council procedure bylaw says that agendas must be provided to you in paper, and members, I think, organically have sort of switched to electronic, and the proposed amendment would have agendas and notices delivered to you to your village email, unless you directed otherwise. Like, if you'd still you get the email, but you'd also get a paper copy.
Yes.
So it gives a bit of flexibility there on comfort for each member.
Yeah, because we shouldn't be photocopying all this paperwork if they're not going to use it.
Yeah. Okay. And the next one is about the change to the closed portion, and we discussed this about having meetings start at 4 p.m. on a regular council meeting night. And that's for regular council meetings starting at 5:30. And the notice requirement is set for 4 o'clock on the Thursday before the meeting. So we'd have to have a notice to council members that was taking place. So I was just looking if you think that's sufficient notice to be available at 4 o'clock on the following Monday.
Okay.
Okay, great.
That could be problematic, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, we can give more notice potentially if that's.
Well,
Because
if
some future council might be working or have other conflicts,
Yes.
so we could look at maybe a week's notice.
Yeah, I think a little bit more notice would
Okay.
be beneficial.
The next item,
So, just for the conversation on that one. So this one would be where, and I think it's been mentioned, is where there was, say, a consultant or something or there's some need that we didn't want them to wait and sit around the very end of the meeting when it was, so it's time. So it would be used for only those occasions when that would be, or there's a closed session item that would be, rather than that wait. So it certainly, as much notice, we can update that, but just the reason for that is for, things just to make sure that it's efficient and timely, so.
Yeah, that makes sense.
okay, the next item is regarding late items, and late items that would be, say, a public submission on something that was time sensitive, and we'd like to propose a 2 p.m. deadline for that on the meeting day. It becomes a little challenging for staff if we receive a number of submissions and we're racing to get those out to you and also preparing for the meeting. So it's a bit of a time crunch. So if you're comfortable with that 2 p.m. deadline cutoff. Okay.
So will that also involve council members that ask for late items on the table?
This would be for public, it's set out as public submissions only. So if we get an email relating to something that was, I'm trying to think of what we've had in the past, there was something recently that, it might have been a public hearing, I think, but there was something else, we had something, and
2 p.m. seems
And there were a
generous
bunch
to
of
me.
late letters.
there were some
that
letters,
came,
I
yeah.
think, on an agenda item.
Like you could
Yeah.
claw that back to noon or something.
Well, I think ultimately the intent here is the chair of the meeting would be able to determine, like, if there is a need for this to be put on there. However, because it's in the procedure bylaw, there is ability to say, if there's no timeliness to this, it is to say, this hasn't been received by this set time, then it's going to have to be moved to another date. So, but if there was, a need for urgency, that's certainly something that could be considered. But it's a kind of a hard time that just says, and then if someone asks, that's what we don't ever say this is the date. Like that's really, we try and encourage them to have this in on time, but we are aware things do come up. And
Yes, we've had that happen a number of times where you get things at the last time, and they're very important to the community. So I think that's really important, but we could do it at no later than 2:00 because it is a rush for staff.
That's reasonable. Okay, that's great. And I think that's the time deadline we were proposing for public hearing submissions to come in on email as well. That doesn't mean that they wouldn't, for a public hearing is a different process. We'd actually bring them to the meeting and read them out to you. But it's just to that distribution point where we collate them all and distribute them to council ahead of time.
Thank you.
The next item is delegation, and we talked about this, about possibility, as we did tonight, to have those through electronic facilities if arranged in advance, and that would be as determined by the corporate officer to make that happen administratively. Consent calendar was a housekeeping item to delete that because we no longer use that. And question period. Questions may be received by email if the meeting is live streamed, and a limit of 2 questions per person, if that's acceptable.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so with that feedback, you'll likely see this on your November 8th council agenda. And there is a recommendation there if council would like to.
I'll move that Committee of the Whole recommend that council give first reading of the Council Procedure Amendment Bylaw number 1153, 2021, and direct staff to give public notice.
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, stay here.
Next, we have that the committee received the Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities 2022 Resolution Report.
Move a seat.
Second.
All in favor? Carried.
Okay, so AVICC conference is proposed to be held in person this year in Victoria, and April 1st to 3rd, and they've sent out their notice for resolutions, and of course, as you know, AVICC resolutions, if endorsed, go down to UBCM in the fall. So this is just an opportunity for council to discuss if any resolutions that they'd like to take to AVICC, and what we can do is do some research and prepare some drafts and bring those back to you.
Well, it's nice to see it going back to what it used to be like, because I think that's something that we've really missed at AVICC and UBCM, is the new way of doing it. The resolutions certainly don't get the input from the rest of the elected officials. And so, does anybody have any suggestions at this point, or do you want to think about it for a while? Yes, Councillor.
Well, I think we can probably put forward something about amending the Private Managed Forest Lands Act again, being that they've put off the review of that till winter of 2023, I believe. So it's good, I think, to keep voicing that.
We're here again.
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking about was what was just presented to us by the Substance Use Strategy Committee around the power of municipalities to decriminalize within their boundary. I need to obviously look more into what that entails, but to advocate for that on a province-wide basis, I think would probably be a good idea.
I think that would be a good thing to talk to the RCMP about the next time they come to our council meeting. How they would handle that.
Yeah, I I agree with that one as well. The decrim within municipal boundaries. And also, and I'm not sure whether we want two different private managed forest things, but I think we would want to, I mean, our current issue is the watershed, so I feel like we want to keep hammering that, and maybe hammering is not the right word. Keep going back to that, and then just general practices. And I kind of want to keep going on the renewable energy. Like, I think we need to be allowed to be more self-sustaining, if at all possible. And then I could also think of other, funding for, I'm not sure whether, I know we wrote letters about PACE and other climate change mitigation funding, not just for the municipality, but the municipality as a mechanism for our residents to be doing adaptation to their homes. We know homes are one of the biggest places where impact can happen. And then just having had the brief conversation about the RCMP and the potential increase in that cost, I'm not exactly sure what the resolution would be, but yikes, that's way too much money for a small community. We could start there and say maybe we want fewer than 4
I think we
officers.
need to have a good discussion about that.
Yeah.
An all-around discussion, and maybe we could invite somebody here to talk about it that's already
Yeah.
gone through the process
Yeah.
and how they're finding it in their community with the number of officers they have. Because I find that quite often they've already been through it and they know what to look for
Yeah.
and how that can help us.
Yeah.
Because, yes.
I believe, didn't UBCM have a committee as well to negotiate the RCMP contract? I'm not.
So
Yeah.
they might be a good
I
source.
think that's
Yeah.
completed.
Yeah. I also think it's really important for us to understand what we're getting into if we're going to hit the 5,000 mark, into what the contract really is about for us as a community and what's involved in that whole process. I know staff is working on it very hard, but I think council also needs to know what to expect.
And what our frame of influence might be.
Yes. Once we have a contract. Yes. I know that's a little off topic.
That's definitely not a resolution. But.
But I think,
Certainly, as the CFO had mentioned last week there, that discussion has just started.
yes.
So we'll have a conversation how we can get that information to council, because that's obviously something that is important to what that transition looks like, even when it happens. What are those pieces? So we'll reach out again. I know there was some information we were waiting to get back from the RCMP. We'll get that back, and then we can have either that individual or some representative come and speak to what that contract looks like.
Okay, thank you.
Could I ask, in regards to bringing some of these subjects back, like the renewable energy and the climate change and private managed forest lands? I know with last year's resolutions currently with the province, I don't think they've responded yet. UBCM, I believe, does prefer sort of not to have repeated resolutions go back. So if we could maybe take a different tact on some of those, and we'd have to look at what was submitted last year. But if you have any suggestions, happy to receive that.
There's a couple of topics on the next meeting, forest policy meeting, and it'll be interesting to see how they take the presentations that we're all going to give and the feedback from that also. So, yeah, might have more input after those meetings and see what they say, the ministry staff. Yes.
Yeah, so the energy policy one, I feel pretty defeated with
Yeah, they
talks with
basically-
BC Hydro around getting independent energy projects from municipalities, just because they stated that there's already a surplus of energy and Site C hasn't even come online yet. So they made it clear there was absolutely no interest from the province's perspective to invest in communities in renewable energy projects. So it was really disappointing, and I don't know that we'll get anywhere because they were just so clear about the direction right now. And then with the private mesh forest land, maybe we could get a little bit more specific about some of the issues we have, and one of those things is the use of different chemicals within forest practices in watersheds. So, the herbicides and fire retardants, other things like that, that maybe we could take issue with that specifically and ask for more information or possibly more municipal control over the use of those products so close to our reservoirs. That might be one tack that could change it enough for EVICC and UBCM executive to see it as a different resolution.
As a priority, yeah.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
To take one and go forward with that.
Yeah.
One at a time.
Yeah.
And see if
Yeah, and I wonder if, I know one of the challenges is just clarity on where your watershed boundaries are and hydrological studies to see the potential impacts of forestry. So that would be another slightly different angle that we could look at. So funding for municipalities to actually look at, to do that kind of research on our watersheds so that we understand the functioning, how they function, and can respond accordingly when logging is imminent.
Right, yes.
Or
Okay.
planned, preferably.
Is that fine for everybody?
Yeah, that's enough, I think, for sure.
Yeah, we'll be busy. Thank you. Any questions, Rachel?
It's unfortunate that this list has stayed the same for 7 years.
Some of them have been ongoing for many, many years. Okay,
Great, thank you.
thank you.
Thanks, Rachel.
The committee received the quarterly report to council July, September 2021.
Move receipt.
Second.
All in favor? Carried.
Right. So before you is just our quarterly update for the village. I'll just quickly note the first page, just a couple of high-level comments that I included in the report. So probably two of the main observations in the last quarter is certainly we still continue to be responding to COVID, provincial health orders, and that, as everyone recalls, if we think back to June, we were going down one path and then quickly changed direction, and so there's continued to be adjustments both internally as an organization responding to events that suddenly were able to occur, and what was from capacity to indoor versus outdoor. The recreation has certainly been very challenged. Our facilities have been challenged. So the restart, as we're all aware, we got to phase 3 there very shortly, and then went back very quickly. So this quarter had continued to be some challenges. Things have settled down towards the end of the quarter in the sense of what those updates and activities are from an organization, but a lot of energy and resources was put into that, to respond and make sure that we as an organizations meet certain criteria, such as even things, in our safety side of, we were required to create a communal disease policy, from a safe work practice. So there were some changes, even just to, internally. So there's a lot of work and energy put into that. Through that period of time, it's interesting today of all days to talk about drought, but this was a summer of, record days of drought, which, the village entered into stage 2 of water restrictions, which I think has only happened, well, definitely only one other time in the last number of years. And so very, a period of time that really challenged, the village and, operations, a lot of stuff we haven't done in the last, so we've already started doing a bit of a review of what that process looks like. And I believe, if we recall back, our manager of operations had talked about, updating our policy related to that. So we'll be bringing a report to council to talk about how we move into stage 2 or 3 and how we move back out and what that looks like. So that's something that we'll have to be bringing to council, but definitely a challenging year. The one positive was that I think, and the fire chief has spoken to this, we had a good year in the sense of, there was no, wildfires, in the sense of that, we're out of control. The people were very respectful, and our bylaw patrols that were on weekends and our fire watch on the weekends and evenings, confirmed that people were, managing themselves in appropriate, ways out in the backcountry there. So that was good. And then the other one that was to note was this, what they're referencing as like the heat dome. So another, yes, we had the prolonged dry spell, but we also had a couple of periods that were extreme heats, and one in particular that was really challenging. And so both the province as well as local governments, we've really begun the process of actually talking about what does that look like long term. How are we going to respond? How can we respond, and what capabilities do we have? And so I know regionally we're working with the other regional partners to talk about what that future response looks like. We activated a cooling center. I mean, it was, within our means in the sense of much as we could do. There was, we don't have facilities set up specifically for this, and there's a lot of organizations like that. So we're looking at what that looks like in the future. And we haven't been advised from the province exactly what, us as local government is responsible for, but there's certainly been a talk about legislation that would, put the local government more in a, we'd be in more of a responsibility, have more responsibility than just, from the province's side that, enacting our emergency procedures at that time. So quite a unique summer, certainly one that, with all other activities, and I'm certainly happy to answer any of the questions regarding any projects. But it was certainly challenging with, say, COVID, heat related, lack of precipitation. It was not a normal summer by any means. And coming out of a year and a bit of COVID, even from an organization, we've gone a period of time without, staff, being able to take off time, and they were able to take that time off. So we did catch up with some vacations, which was great. People were able to get that time away, and so now we enter the fall, and it's extremely busy with a number of projects. But before you in the report there, I'm happy to answer any questions relating to any of the projects. One of the other two highlights, just as relation to, we did receive significant $225,000 grant for our development modernization. So that project is just underway right now, or the planning for it is underway, and we'll be releasing an RFP shortly. So that's a really exciting one for us to be able to look at how we do things. And we talked about communication earlier. That's probably one of the big pieces, both internally and externally. So that's a really exciting project for the village as we go through a lot of development. And the other piece was we received a active transportation planning grant. So that project is also just starting to get rolling right now with our consultants. So two very important projects that are underway. But as you can see within the report, there's many others that are at various stages and various activities. So happy to answer any questions relating to the report before you.
Any questions of Clayton? Yes, Councillor Brown?
Sure.
Yeah.
So first of all, thank you so much for this. This report is it's just fantastic to see the progress we're making on some items that we've been talking about for a long time, in particular the natural asset management policy. And given again the weather today and the last few days, I feel like we we've got some wetland, probably things to look at there. So that's great that that's undergoing. And just seeing all the new bullets there in your list is just, thank you for this and for the clarity that these reports bring to us. I think it's really helpful.
Did you have a question?
I don't have a question specifically.
So just on the asset management policy, which will encompass the natural asset, we actually had the staff just had a workshop this morning with our consultant, and so we're expecting that either the meeting in November or the first in December we'll have that policy back to council, and we'll draft policy for review. So that was a session we just had this morning. So it's staff, we went through what are the key pieces of a asset management policy, and again, I'm framing it as asset management, but the criteria of natural assets versus built assets will be included in there. So it was a really good session this morning to talk about what those key pieces are, and we spoke exactly of some of those natural assets that how are they impacted, how did they service the community, and I mean that in a way that we were talking about what is that risk versus service level, and so that was a conversation we had earlier today.
Thank you. And I will say that the report is excellent. You've improved how you report to council, and definitely it's great to see the goal completion of 51%. Absolutely amazing with everything that you had to do. Thank you. Next, we'll go to Michelle Mason, Chief Financial Officer and Deputy CAO. Your report. Is there anything that you would like to highlight out of your report?
No, there's nothing nothing to note at this time. Everything is moving the way I expect it. The third quarter, but I can answer any questions.
Okay. Just ask for you to highlight a few things because the audience doesn't get to see this.
Oh,
the
okay.
people that are watching.
They certainly could see this if they wanted to.
They certainly could. It's on the website.
could be
You just
reading it
have to
off
go
the
to
website right
cumberland.ca and download
Yes.
the agenda.
Yes, but
These fancy things are all online.
but it's
Wealth of
nice.
information.
Not everybody does.
No,
And I think you've done such an amazing job, Michelle.
Thank you. Well, I would just like to say that your net, something to point out is your net financial asset position. It's like almost 2.9 million, and it's really budgeted to be only 160,000. So that's at this time of year, it's just because a lot of your financial information hasn't come into the system yet. But you tax and everything at 100% in the year. So, and then of course, as the project that you're mainly borrowing for now in this year is the wastewater treatment. So that will probably get carried over to your following year. So you probably won't hit that small number in your net financial asset. Other than that, all of the departments are on track with their spending, and there is nothing to note in those budgets. And the capital spent is only at 21%, but that's quite often the case at this time because it finishes up, and then you probably will have a few of those capital projects carry over to the following year. So it's not unexpected.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brown.
I do have a quick question about the wastewater debt compared to the grant that we got. Can you just explain that?
Yes.
How much of each? How much is each?
Yeah. So currently your project is at $9.7 million, and just over 7.1 million of that is going to be recovered through a grant. So then you have about 2.8 or 2.56 or something like that in debt that will have to be borrowed at this point. So 73% is your grant.
Great, awesome, thanks.
Any further questions? Thank you very much, Michelle.
Okay, thank you.
Next is the report from our Fire Chief, Manager of Protective Services. He's not in attendance, so I'm sure Clayton would try and answer any questions that you have. Councillor Brown?
I won't ask you a challenging question, but I did hear and read in this report that the recruitment that the fire hall was expected to provide didn't unfold as we thought, and so we might. I know Mike puts regular notices in currently Cumberland, but maybe we can beef those up somehow, or
Can launch our new Facebook page
Launch
or
our- yeah.
something like that.
to attract firefighters.
Yeah, so the fire chief and myself are meeting Wednesday to, just to kind of have a conversation about what that might look like, recruitment and so forth. And I believe the number, I mean, obviously the goal is always to secure as many, volunteers as possible. I believe that they did receive 2 this year, but the goal is usually higher than. I don't know the exact number that they were looking for. However, we're going to talk a little bit further about what that looks like, because there's some other options. Do we need to? Typically, they have a period where they want to recruit, and then that group would go through together. But is this an opportunity for us? Because not everybody's time aligns always the same. I know there's some additional costs if you bring in recruits at a different time of the year. However, that's the conversation that we're going to have is it like an open recruitment? So if someone does come and they're interested in January, well, maybe there's an ability to do that, but he's going to be looking at that, and that's one of the conversations that we're going to have in the coming days here. So we certainly will want to report back to council if there's any changes or recommendations related to that. But right now, he is confident with what the firefighters that we do have in place and the recruits, but definitely we don't want to see this trend go the way that it is shown this year.
Okay, thank you. Yes?
I just had one more. The parking notices, so looks like a total of 205 for, I think that's April to December 2020, and they look to be reducing. But just wondering if those is that residents or is that visitors, or do you have any idea what that's an awfully large number for a community of this size, is it not?
75, just or 175 in the 1 quarter.
Yeah. So that was in
The spring.
2020. So that could have been just like the first of people.
The start of COVID.
The start of COVID, yeah. So maybe it is visitors then that's driving that up.
I know that, and I will find out this information, but I know that the beginning of COVID, there was a number,
Yeah.
and this maybe of notices, not tickets, but notices of just reminders to people, because if you recall, there was people, sleeping in trailers and all that, and it was just reminders of what the expectations are, that this is still a bylaw, but, during this period of time, there was a waiving of that just during that early phase where we had a lot of people, moving into trailers in their house to, allow them to self-isolate. But I will find out what that 175 is.
Yeah, and then,
Back.
and that's interesting because I was assuming that was generating some income as well to pay for all that time of delivering those tickets, but potentially not for some of that time.
It didn't for definitely,
Yeah,
maybe an entry error as well, maybe 17.
Yeah.
yeah.
We'll find out.
The one at top says parking tickets. The one below says parking
Notices,
notices. Yeah. A difference. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? No? Okay, then we'll go on to Courtney Simpson, Manager of Development Services.
Good evening. So This quarterly report covers primarily development applications, new, open, closed, and list them for you. And I also provided a summary of some of the highlights of the last quarter, including both the Maple Street residential subdivision and the 6-lot industrial subdivision off of Bevan Road are in the construction phase now. And you heard it here first. The new name of that road is Beck Avenue. That's that 6-lot. Beck, yes, that's from the council street naming policy. It's one of the approved names on that list. Beck, B-E-C-K, Beck Avenue.
But it just means a creek. It's north of England, right?
Yeah.
So it's sort of like saying creek.
Yeah.
Was that a choice of staff or was that the developer?
That was the name the developer put forward as their preferred name, and staff agreed that was fine. They had a couple of criteria. They wanted it to be easy to spell and to understand. You know, they're expecting all sorts of deliveries to the businesses there and want it to be very easy for everyone to find. And they did also look into the meaning, being a creek, and they actually liked that connection. That site has just a beautiful view of the Comox Glacier. It's amazing, and they have, I think, perhaps... that was an idea that they had that might lead to a theme of names and future roads that would be in that area.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the number of new development applications is 5 in the last quarter, which is lower than the previous quarter, and we closed more than we opened, which is very good news for me from a workload management perspective. Remain very busy though with all sorts of work that doesn't necessarily get recorded as a development application. Both Iloilo and the big store have new owners in the last quarter, and we've spent quite a bit of time with both of them going over their options for revitalization of those properties. And prepared the request for proposals for this development approvals modernization project, which will issue that request for proposals shortly. And just one other thing I want to add that I didn't include in the written report here, of course, we continue to work on our priority long-range planning projects. So the one right now that we're working on is the vacation rentals regulation project.
Any questions? Councillor Kettler?
Yep, definitely eager to see that last one you talked about, the vacation rentals policy. I have a question about the Maple Street, the 24-lot subdivision. Is that going to be coming to council for any reason in the near future?
No, that does not come to council for any approvals, that one.
Okay.
That subdivision is only part of the lot. It's the area you see behind the fire hall. For their second phase, which is some more of the remaining land, I understand, if that's going to be multifamily, if they intend it to be multifamily, it does need a rezoning, which would come to council. So they haven't begun, they haven't made any application yet for the remainder of that property.
Okay, and did we see this previously as a subdivision application?
The first phase?
Yeah.
I don't believe so. This one, it's interesting. It didn't need any development permits. It's not in the development permit area and no variances. So my understanding is you haven't seen it at all in any formal way.
I think it's very, very old, that proposal.
Okay. Yeah.
That's one of the things I think it was that I think we dealt with it a long time ago. Yeah.
And so I've seen they put curbs there this week. Do we have somebody that is on the village's behalf, sort of goes out and watches the progression of the development of road and other utilities going in and stuff like that?
Yes, we do. So they have a detailed design that outlines all the details, down to the details of the curb, for example. And for the subdivision to be approved, they have to be constructing it exactly as to the design. And yeah, it's mainly our operations staff who do those inspections.
Okay. And so has a stormwater management plan been put forward yet, or is that later?
Yes, I believe it has.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because there is a pretty significant culvert right where Maple Street is hooking up to Kendall. And right now it's just dirt and there's a lot of construction, so there isn't any silt curtains or anything like that out there. So that's why I'm sort of asking about the inspection process with the heavy rains and that water just going into the creek and the silt and stuff. So if we could maybe have a look at that a little closer.
Yes, I'll certainly do that. Thank you.
One of the benefits of our engineer technician that's been recently hired is that's one of the duties that we're able to get on site more often than we have in the past there, and so it's been a real benefit. I know that staff person has been to that site on a couple of occasions for inspections and when they're ready. So that has been the benefit of having the engineer tech, is that on-site check-ins. You know, there's certainly, like Courtney's mentioned, there's a lot of we get the engineer, they've got engineers sign off, but we now have that ability to have someone out there more often, more regularly, and so that's been the case in the last couple months here.
Good to hear. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Brown?
If I could just follow up on that, I know it's come up a couple of times, that particular development, and I understand that it didn't come to council because it's just a subdivision, but I also regularly receive questions around that subdivision, and I've never even seen a map of it. So if that could be shared with us so that we're aware of what it's going to look like and can respond in a reasonable way without shoving all those questions over to you guys, because people are curious about what's happening. It's just so highly visible, and so for us not to have any knowledge of it is
The gentleman at the village hall too
challenging.
mentioned about all the retaining walls going in there too, so I don't know, a lot of people think.
I thought that was covered in the last report you gave to council.
Yeah, since that question came up at the last village hall, we did share that with the council's weekly
Yes.
correspondence, so it was in there. Just to add to that, so this is one of the benefits of this development modernization, because what we would really, what the Management Development Services has been looking at is what all these processes look like, because really, like has been mentioned here, there are certain subdivisions that if there is no variance, there's no requirements. Really, at the end of the day, that direction is right now that staff move that forward based on all the criteria from engineering, stormwater requirements. But that's one of the pieces that we want to have some workshops as part of this development modernization. Look at what process look like, what that exchange of how a development goes from A to Z, and what does that process look like. So and what is the most efficient but process that's actually going to be in the best interest for the village long term. So that's exactly what this modernization project is to a T. Is we'll cover off and allow workshops with council, developers, and internally with staff there as well. So that's one of the really exciting things about this project that's going to be happening, is to be able to go through that and really find out what those best practices are, because there are definitely things that we've done consistently in the past, and there's probably new ways to address some of those processes. So.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So there's under development permits, there's 3025 Royston Road, which looks like a manufacturing home park. So that's exciting. And is that will that be coming to us, or is that just a process?
That will be coming to you. We put it under the list, well, it does require a development permit. It also requires a permit for a manufactured home park. The village has a bylaw specifically for that, so it will come to you. That's right.
And so a follow-up question to that, if not knowing anything about this application, but knowing that there is in the community this consistent, like, why don't we build a bunch of tiny homes? And is that currently an option within our manufactured, what's it called? A mobile home park, manufactured home park?
Well,
Or do they have to be trailers?
I might have to review that bylaw, but I would say what I do know is that
for a dwelling to receive a building permit, it has to meet the building code, or in the case of manufactured homes, there's like a CSA certification. So, and in both of these cases, the homes could be very small. So I think that's the answer, that it kind of meets that a development that meets sort of the concept of a tiny home village, yes, could fit within this bylaw, but those are the criteria: the building code or the CSA certification.
Yeah, it would have to be a modular or something that's to code. Like
Yeah,
yeah.
or something tiny, yet, it has meets all the criteria of the building code with the size of windows, etc., or it's been certified by an engineer if it sort of deviates from the building code.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay.
I just wanted to say thank you to Courtney about the Maple Street. I've had the most questions about Maple Street, and we did go, the people were out, but they're puzzled by all the water that's everywhere. So I guess we'll just see it unfolding, but it's good if you can. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Courtney.
Thanks, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Time for question period. And if you have any questions, please email info@cumberland.ca using subject line question period. And just to let you know, if you do have a question that is not on the agenda tonight, you can contact info@cumberland.ca, and the person that receives those emails will send it on to the appropriate staff person, or if it's a question for council, they will forward it to us. So please don't hesitate in contacting us. Any questions from the audience? Yes. Well, it sounds like the storm has calmed down. Has it calmed down out there? Yes. That was amazing yesterday with the thunder and the lightning. Oh. Yes.
It was really close.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
I haven't heard
I think it was
thunder
inside
like
my
that
house,
in
actually.
years.
It went really fast.
It
It
did.
was bouncing off and all
Yeah.
the way to Courtney.
Flash and the thunder were very close together, much closer than I'd heard before.
Yes. Very loud.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there was a lot of kids crying. They didn't like it.
Well, it felt like the gods must be angry. I mean, it was just outside the little park, and when it all went boom, and we had little 5-year-olds, and then the hail. We were all running.
yeah.
Annabelle's house is only like 2 blocks away, but we felt we ought to run or do something. Not sure what wrong.
Nothing? Okay. So a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much to everyone.
We have to move to close, though? Move to close?
We
Oh,
did
we
that.
did that? Okay, sorry.
We're moving to in-camera, right?